The night was heavy with silence, the kind that wraps around you like a thick fog, muffling all sound except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Sarah and I lay back on the cool grass of my backyard, our eyes glued to the twinkling stars above us. It was one of those rare nights when the sky seemed to be an endless tapestry of diamonds, and we felt small yet connected to something larger. We had been friends forever, our bond deepened by countless sleepovers, whispered secrets, and shared dreams beneath the starlit sky. "Look at that one," Sarah exclaimed, pointing excitedly at a particularly bright star. "Do you think it's a sign?" I chuckled, nudging her shoulder playfully. "If it is, I hope it's a sign that we're going to ace our next math test." She rolled her eyes, but I could see the smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You and your grades. One day, you'll have to embrace the chaos of life, you know?" Yeah, I replied, leaning back again, my eyes tracing the constellations. "But I like chaos that comes with good grades." Just as I was about to retort with another joke, Sarah's phone buzzed loudly, breaking the serene atmosphere. She fished it out of her pocket, her brow furrowing as she read the text. My heart sank as I noticed the sudden shift in her demeanor. "Sarah, what is it?" I asked, sitting up. The carefree moment we had been sharing evaporated like morning mist. "It's Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "He says he's in trouble." "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" My stomach twisted in a knot. Jake was one of our closest friends, a guy who always seemed to have everything under control. The thought of him being in danger was unfathomable. "I don't know. He just said he needs help. That he's scared," she replied, her eyes darting back and forth as if she were searching for answers in the darkness. Without thinking, I jumped to my feet. "We have to go find him. Right now?" she gasped, as if the idea hadn't fully registered yet. "Yes, grab a flashlight. If Jake's in trouble, we can't waste any more time." Sarah nodded, her expression transforming from shock to determination. She scrambled to her feet, and together we rushed inside my house. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer, while Sarah hurried to grab her backpack. Moments later, we were back outside, the cool night air hitting us like a slap in the face. "Which way should we go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as we stepped into the shadowy forest that bordered our neighborhood. "The last time I heard from him, he was by the old oak tree near the creek," I said, trying to recall the last time we'd all hung out there. "If he's in trouble, he might have gone there for some privacy." We pushed through the underbrush, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The forest felt alive around us, the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves amplified in the stillness. I called out Jake's name, my voice echoing into the night. "Jake, where are you? Jake!" Sarah joined in, her voice rising with urgency. "Where are you?" Each shout felt like a thread of hope pulled taut against the weight of fear. What if we didn't find him? What if something terrible had already happened? My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. I could see the worry etched on Sarah's face, her eyes wide and glistening like those stars we had been admiring just moments before. After what felt like an eternity of searching, we finally made our way to the old oak tree. It loomed above us, its branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, casting eerie shadows on the ground. As we approached, the beam of my flashlight fell upon something glinting in the dirt at the base of the tree. "Sarah, look!" pointed, my heart racing. "Over there." We hurried toward it, and as we drew closer, the shining object revealed itself as a small piece of metal. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt to uncover a bent piece of metal with something carved into it. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was a message. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." I read aloud, my voice trembling. "What does this mean? Why would Jake leave this here?" Sarah's face paled as she took a step back, her hands covering her mouth. "This doesn't make sense. Why would he apologize? What happened to him?" "I don't know, but we have to figure it out," I replied, my mind racing. "Maybe he's nearby. Let's keep looking." We searched the surrounding area, calling out his name, but the only response we received was the wind whispering through the leaves. Every time I thought I heard something, my heart would leap, only to be met with silence. The darkness felt thick around us, and I could sense a growing unease creeping into my bones. "Where could he be?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking slightly as she glanced around nervously. "He might have gone deeper into the woods," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "Let's check the path that leads to the creek." We ventured further into the woods, our flashlights flickering against the trees. The shadows danced ominously, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I glanced behind us, half expecting to see someone lurking in the darkness. "Do you think he could be with someone?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But we can't rule anything out." As we made our way to the creek, the sound of water bubbling over rocks filled the air. It was a familiar sound, one that usually brought comfort, but tonight it felt ominous. I shone my flashlight along the bank, searching for any sign of Jake. "Jake!" I called again, my voice echoing against the trees. "Please answer us." But the only response was the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Sarah and I exchanged a worried glance, the weight of the night settling heavily on our shoulders. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned the flashlight in that direction, but it was just a rabbit darting into the bushes. I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. "It's just an animal," I muttered, shaking my head. We continued along the creek, our hearts racing as we searched for any signs of Jake. Just when I was about to suggest we head back, I spotted something on the ground, a piece of torn fabric. "Sarah, look," I exclaimed, kneeling down to examine it. "This is from Jake's jacket." Her eyes widened as she stepped closer. "Are you sure? It looks like it could be." I nodded, the reality sinking in. He was definitely here. Panic surged through me as I looked around, the shadows feeling more oppressive than ever. "We have to find him, Sarah. We can't give up." "Right?" she said, determination flooding her voice. "We'll find him. We have to." With renewed urgency, we moved on, our hearts pounding in sync with the fear that consumed us. But as we pressed deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn into something far darker than just a missing friend. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was trying to keep us from discovering the truth. Finally, we reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal an ancient oak, its gnarled roots sprawling across the ground. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached it. Something about this place felt wrong, almost foreboding. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. "If you're here, please respond." But the only answer was the whisper of the wind through the branches, taunting us with its silence. I turned to Sarah, the fear in her eyes matching my own. "What do we do now?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But we can't stop looking. We owe it to him." As we stood there, uncertainty gnawing at us, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to Jake and why he had sent that message. The night felt heavy with unanswered questions, and I knew that whatever had drawn him away from us was something we were about to uncover. But as we searched the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light that filtered through the trees, illuminating the remnants of the night before. The events of the previous evening were still fresh in my mind. Sarah and I had been out in the yard, stargazing when Jake's text arrived. It was a cry for help, a jarring interruption to our peaceful night. Now, with the morning sun warming the chill from the air, we felt the weight of the world on our shoulders. "I can't believe he's missing," Sarah murmured, shaking her head as we made our way to Jake's school. Her hair shone like spun gold in the sunlight, but the worry etched on her face dulled its beauty. "He wouldn't just disappear. We have to find out what happened," I replied, determination solidifying my voice. "His friends might know something." As we reached the school, The bustling sounds of students filled the air, laughter mingling with shouts. It felt surreal, like a world detached from our grim reality. We approached a group of Jake's friends, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. "Hey, have you seen Jake?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. One of them, Mark, shifted nervously. He's been acting weird lately," he said, glancing at his friends, who nodded in agreement. "He started hanging out with this group. I don't know much, but they're not exactly normal." "What do you mean by not normal?" I pressed, my heart racing. "They're secretive, man," Mark continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They call themselves the Circle or something. I think they meet in the woods sometimes. It's all kind of freaky." Sarah and I exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between us. "Did he mention anything about a party?" I asked, feeling a sense of urgency. Mark hesitated, his eyes darting away. "Yeah, he did, but I don't know where it was or anything. He just said it was private, that it was important." "Important for what?" Sarah pushed, frustration creeping into her tone. "I don't know," Mark exclaimed, throwing his hands up. "I just know he's been different. He didn't want to talk about it." "Thanks, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "If you hear anything else, please let us know." As we turned to leave, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around to see Ethan, his face breaking into a familiar grin. "Hey, Sarah, what's going on?" "We're looking for Jake," Sarah replied, her tone clipped. "He's missing." Ethan's expression shifted to one of concern. "Missing? What do you mean?" I quickly recounted the events leading up to that moment, leaving out the night's more harrowing details. "We think he might be involved with some dangerous people," I concluded. "I can help," Ethan offered, his eyes flicking to Sarah. "I've always wanted to help you guys. You know, if there's anything I can do." "Why do you want to help?" I interrupted, sensing the underlying tension. "Because I care about you guys," he said, looking genuinely earnest. "And I've always had a thing for Sarah." Sarah rolled her eyes, and I could see the frustration bubbling beneath her surface. "Ethan, this isn't a time for—" "I know it's not," he cut her off, his voice rising slightly. "But I can be useful. I know things about Jake. I've seen him with that group. Why didn't you say anything before?" I challenged, crossing my arms. "Because I thought it was just a phase," Ethan replied, exasperated. "But now I'm worried. If he's really in trouble, I want to help." After a moment of silence, Sarah sighed. "Fine, if you really want to help, then come with us. But we need to find out where this group is meeting." We left the school, the weight of uncertainty hanging heavily in the air. My mind raced with questions. What was Jake involved in? Who were these people, and why was he drawn to them? As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into something far darker than we anticipated. Ethan led us to the edge of town, where the trees thickened, forming a shadowy barrier around the path we followed. "Jake's been acting strange for a while now," Ethan said, glancing back at us. "I thought he was just going through some stuff, but now I see it was more. He started hanging out with people I didn't know." "What do you mean?" Sarah pressed, her curiosity piqued despite her apprehension. "He mentioned some parties, but they weren't the usual parties. He said they had activities that made him feel alive." Ethan replied, his voice trailing off. "Activities?" I echoed, feeling a chill run down my spine. "What kind of activities?" Ethan hesitated, his expression darkening. "I don't know for sure, but I heard whispers about rituals or something, like they believe in some sort of power." "Rituals?" Sarah repeated, incredulous. "This isn't some horror movie, Ethan. I'm just telling you what I heard," he shot back, frustration evident in his tone. He was excited about it, like it was a secret he couldn't wait to share. But he never did. We reached the edge of a clearing, and I paused, feeling the weight of the silence. It was disconcerting how the world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. "Do you think they meet here?" I asked. "Maybe," Ethan replied, squinting into the woods. But it could be anywhere. I just wish I had more information. Let's go to his house, I suggested. Maybe we can find something that leads us to him. The three of us made our way to Jake's house, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. As we entered, the familiar scent of his mother's cooking wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. The living room was filled with memories of laughter and friendship, but now it felt like a hollow shell. "Where do you think we should look?" Sarah asked, glancing around. "Let's check his room," I said, leading the way. The door creaked open, revealing a space that felt intimate yet foreign. Jake's room was filled with posters of bands, books scattered across the floor, and the remnants of his life before everything changed. As we rummaged through his belongings, Ethan picked up a small notebook. "What's this?" he asked, flipping it open. The pages were filled with sketches and notes, some about school, but others felt different, darker. "Let me see," Sarah said, peering over his shoulder. "What's this about?" "It looks like he's been drawing symbols," Ethan said, pointing to a series of intricate designs. "Weird ones. Those look like the ones I've seen in the old folktales," I said, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Jake always loved that stuff. "Maybe it's connected to whatever he got himself into," Sarah suggested. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, his brow furrowed in concern. "But why would he be drawing them unless he was involved in something?" "Let's keep looking," I urged, trying to push down the growing anxiety. There had to be something here that could help us understand what was happening. As we continued to search, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Each moment spent in Jake's room felt like a minute stolen from our chances of finding him. The world outside continued on, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around us. "Guys, look at this," Sarah exclaimed, pulling out a piece of paper from under a pile of clothes. It was a flyer for a party, but not just any party, a gathering hosted by The Circle. "Where did you find that?" Ethan asked, leaning closer. "It was hidden under his bed," she replied, her voice shaky. "This is it. This is where he's been going." I took the flyer, reading the details. "It's tonight," I said, my heart racing. "We have to go." Ethan nodded, determination flooding his features. "I'm in. If Jake's there, we need to get him out." "Let's do this," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. We were stepping into the unknown, but we had to try. For Jake, for all of us. The morning light crept into the room, warming the cold air that had settled overnight. I could hear Sarah in the kitchen, her voice soft and contemplative as she poured herself a mug of coffee. My heart felt heavy. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind like a broken record. Jake's message echoed in my thoughts. "I'm in trouble." Those 3 words had sent us into a panic, racing through the dark forest, calling out his name until our voices were hoarse. I didn't know what to make of it, but the fear that gripped me was all too real. "Hey, are you coming?" Sarah called from the kitchen, breaking me from my reverie. I glanced at the clock and realized we had to get moving. We had decided to visit Jake's school, hoping to find some clue about where he might be or what kind of trouble he was in. I grabbed my bag and joined her in the kitchen. "Sorry, I got lost in thought," I replied, forcing a smile. "Ready to face the day?" "Ready as I'll ever be," she said, her expression a mix of determination and worry. We finished our breakfast in silence, each lost in our thoughts about Jake. After a quick check of our phones, we headed out, the weight of the unknown hanging heavily between us. As we arrived at the school, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The familiar place now felt foreign, tainted by the fear of what lay ahead. We walked through the hallways, the sounds of students laughing and chatting echoing around us, but it all felt distant. We approached Jake's friends, a group of boys huddled near the lockers. "Hey, have you seen Jake?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the tremor I could sense beneath it. One of the boys, Mark, glanced up with a frown. "He's been acting weird lately. I think he's been hanging out with some new crowd." "What do you mean?" I pressed, my curiosity piqued. Mark hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one was eavesdropping. There's this group. I don't really know much about them. They meet at odd hours, and I heard they do some strange stuff. What kind of strange stuff? Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I don't know. Just rumors, I guess. But Jake seemed really into it. Like, more than just friends. That revelation sent a chill down my spine. Do you know where they meet? I asked urgently. Mark shook his head. I wish I could help, but honestly, it's like they're a secret society or something. If you ask around, you might find someone who knows more. We thanked him and walked away, the weight of his words settling heavily on us. A secret society? What the hell? I muttered, feeling a mix of disbelief and dread. Let's check out the library. Maybe we can find something about this group, Sarah suggested, her voice steady despite the rising tension. I nodded, knowing that we needed to keep digging. Upon arriving at the library, we found a quiet corner and started searching through old newspapers and books, hoping to uncover something that could lead us to Jake. Hours passed, and the sunlight streaming through the windows shifted from bright and hopeful to dim and shadowy. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to a faded newspaper article. It talks about some disappearances in the town, all linked to a secret group. This could be connected to Jake. I leaned closer, reading the headlines that sent chills down my spine. This is insane. There's got to be a connection. And here, Sarah added, flipping through another stack of papers. It mentions a society that used to operate around here. They were known for holding bizarre rituals. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. What if Jake got involved in something dangerous? We have to find out who's in this group. As we sifted through the articles, I felt a presence behind us. I turned, but no one was there. The hairs on my neck stood up, and an unsettling feeling crept over me. I tried to shake it off, but it lingered like a shadow. Let's get out of here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As we gathered our things, I caught a glimpse of someone watching us from the corner of my eye. A figure in a dark hoodie, standing just outside the library's entrance. Do you see that? I asked Sarah, pointing discreetly. She turned, but the figure had vanished. It's probably nothing, she said, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Once outside, we decided to take a different route home, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over us. Just as we turned the corner, we almost bumped into Ethan. His familiar face was a welcome sight, but the tension in the air was palpable. Hey, I was just looking for you guys, he said, a hint of relief in his voice. What's going on? We're trying to find Jake, Sarah replied, her tone serious. We think he might be in trouble. Ethan's expression shifted to concern. What do you mean? I glanced at Sarah, who nodded for me to explain. We learned that Jake might be involved with a secret group, and there are rumors about them being linked to some disappearances. Ethan's brow furrowed. That sounds dangerous. You guys shouldn't be doing this alone. I want to help. I hesitated, unsure if we should involve him in this mess. Are you sure you want to get involved in something like this? Could be dangerous. I know what you're thinking, Ethan said, determination in his voice. But I care about both of you, especially Sarah. If there's a chance to help Jake, I'm in. Sarah looked at me, and I could see the gratitude in her eyes. We could use all the help we can get, I admitted. Let's stick together. As we walked home, a strange tension hung in the air. Ethan and Sarah exchanged glances, the kind that made my stomach churn a little with jealousy. I knew Ethan had feelings for Sarah, but now wasn't the time to dwell on that. We had to focus on Jake. Later that afternoon, while rummaging through the attic for anything that might help us, Sarah and Ethan stumbled upon our grandfather's old trunk. What's this? Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. I don't know, I said, wiping the dust off the lid. We never really went through it after he passed. As we opened the trunk, a musty smell wafted out, and inside we found various items. Old photographs, letters, and what looked like a leather-bound journal. Sarah carefully pulled out the journal and began flipping through the pages. Oh my God, she breathed, her eyes wide. This is our grandfather's diary. What does it say? I asked, leaning closer. She read aloud, her voice trembling. It mentions a lineage with secrets and... Oh, here. It talks about rituals and a secret society that operated in this town. It seems like it ran in the family. Ethan's eyes widened. This could be connected to what Jake is involved with. As we continued to read, the atmosphere grew heavier with each revelation. This is insane, I muttered, turning the pages. Our family was involved in something so dark. Sarah's face was pale as she read about strange gatherings, symbols, and names that seemed to echo in our minds. This can't be real. How could we not know about any of this? I don't know, I replied, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. But we need to find out what it all means. If Jake is involved, we can't let it go. The tension between Sarah and Ethan began to simmer. I could sense Ethan's growing concern for Jake, but also his desire to protect Sarah. Meanwhile, Sarah seemed focused, determined to uncover the truth, but I could see the strain it was putting on her. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked, noticing that he had gone quiet. I can't shake the feeling that this is bigger than we think," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "If Jake is mixed up in this, we need to be careful." "I know," Sarah said softly, her gaze steady. "But we can't stop now. We need to figure out what happened to him, and if there's a way to help." The tension in the room thickened, and I felt like an outsider as I watched them. It was as if their connection was deepening, and I was just caught in the middle of it all. But deep down, I knew our shared mission was far more important than any of our personal feelings. As we continued to read the diary, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of uncovering something monumental. Something that would change everything we thought we knew about our family, Jake, and the world around us. The air was thick with tension as I sat in the musty attic of our old house, the faint light from the single bulb flickering above us. Sarah and Ethan were beside me, poring over the yellowed pages of our grandfather's diary, a relic we had stumbled upon just hours ago. The diary had been hidden away, buried beneath a stack of forgotten boxes, but now it felt like a Pandora's box we had unwittingly opened. "Look at this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she turned the page. "He mentioned something about a society, a secret one that operated in the city." Her brow furrowed in concentration, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind, connecting dots that I couldn't even fathom yet. Ethan leaned in closer, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a flashlight. "What kind of society?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "Do you think it has anything to do with Jake?" I swallowed hard, the name hanging in the air like a specter. "It has to," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake mentioned something about a group he was involved with before he disappeared. Maybe this is connected." As we continued to sift through the pages, the atmosphere grew heavier. The diary was filled with the ramblings of a man who had clearly been obsessed with something dark and dangerous. References to rituals, ceremonies, and a list of names that made my stomach turn appeared sporadically throughout the text. I could almost hear the echoes of our grandfather's past, a family history steeped in shadows. "Wait," I said, pointing to a passage that caught my eye. "Here it is. He lists members of the society. Look at these names. They're all familiar." My heart raced as I recognized the last names of people who had lived in our town for generations, people whose faces I'd seen at family gatherings, people who were supposed to be just like us. "This is insane," Ethan muttered, shaking his head as if to clear it. "What if Jake got involved in something he couldn't handle? I mean, if he was part of this, what does that mean for him? For us?" Sarah's eyes were wide, reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "We need to know more. There has to be a way to find out what this society is all about." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tremor of anxiety. After a brief discussion, we decided to head to the local library. It was the only place we could think of that might hold records related to the society and its activities. The walk was shrouded in an unsettling silence, our thoughts racing faster than our legs could carry us. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced ominously along the pavement. As we entered the library, The familiar scent of old books and dust wafted over us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as we made our way to the archives. We spread out, each of us combing through newspapers and microfiche, searching for any mention of the society or its members. After what felt like hours, I finally struck gold. "Guys, over here," I called, waving them over. I had found a stack of old newspaper clippings, yellowed with age and filled with stories that sent chills down my spine. Headlines screamed of disappearances and strange occurrences linked to a cult that had once terrorized the town. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she read over my shoulder. "Look at this one. Local teens go missing after attending secret meetings." Her finger traced the text, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. This can't be a coincidence. Ethan leaned closer, squinting at the text. What if Jake is in danger because of this? If he's involved with them, we need to warn him. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. But how do we even find him? He could be anywhere. As we continued to read, the weight of our discovery sank in deeper. The articles painted a dark picture of the society, filled with ominous warnings that made my skin crawl. I could feel the air around us growing heavier, as if the very walls of the library were closing in. Each article we uncovered seemed to add another layer to the mystery, deepening the shadows that surrounded Jake's disappearance. "Let's get out of here," I finally said, my voice strained. "I need some air." As we stepped outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us in the grasp of twilight. The chill in the air matched the unease in my stomach. Just as we began to walk home, I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, an instinctual warning that we were not alone. "Do you guys feel that?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder. Sarah and Ethan exchanged worried looks. Like, we're being watched? Before they could respond, I caught sight of a figure lurking in the distance. It was shrouded in darkness, their face hidden beneath a hood. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Who is that?" Ethan asked, his voice low and cautious. "I don't know, but we should keep moving," I urged, trying to keep my panic at bay. We quickened our pace, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. As we walked, the figure remained a few paces behind us, always just out of sight. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, a sense of dread settling in my gut. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, creeping closer with every step we took. "Do you think it's someone from the society?" Sarah whispered, glancing back nervously. "Maybe," I replied, my mind racing. "We need to get home and figure out our next move." But as we turned a corner, I dared a glance back, and the figure had vanished. It was as if they had melted into the night, leaving us with an unsettling feeling of being followed. The streets felt more ominous than before, and I found myself wishing I had never uncovered the diary at all. When we finally reached home, we barricaded ourselves in the living room, the weight of what we had discovered pressing down on us. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could see the fear etched on Sarah's face. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. "We need to dig deeper," I said, my resolve hardening. "If Jake is in danger, we can't just sit back and do nothing. There's something bigger at play here, and we need to uncover it before it's too late." "Agreed," Sarah said, her determination shining through the fear. "We'll figure out what this society is really about. We owe it to Jake." But even as I spoke the words, a gnawing doubt began to take root in my mind. What if uncovering the truth only led us deeper into danger? What if we were already in over our heads? The shadows seemed to loom larger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something far more sinister than we could ever have imagined. The morning light spilled through the curtains, and I could feel the weight of the night before still hanging in the air like a thick fog. Sarah and I had barely slept, our minds racing with thoughts of Jake and the terrifying implications of his disappearance. We had spent hours discussing the cryptic message he sent, the chilling feeling that something was profoundly wrong, and the way the shadows seemed to swallow us whole in the forest when we searched for him. "Do you think he's okay?" Sarah asked quietly as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed with concern. I don't know, I admitted, pushing my half-eaten toast away. But we have to find out what happened. We can't just sit here. She nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. Let's go to his school. Maybe someone has seen him or knows where he might be. As we walked to school, the crisp morning air felt refreshing, but it did little to lift the dread in my stomach. The streets were quiet, and the usual chatter of students was muted by our anxiety. When we arrived, we found a small group of Jake's friends huddled together, their expressions a mix of worry and confusion. Hey, have you guys seen Jake? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. One of them, a guy named Kyle, looked up, his face pale. We haven't seen him since last night. He was acting strange, though. He mentioned something about a group he started hanging out with. A group? Sarah echoed, her eyes wide. What group? Kyle hesitated, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. I don't know much, just that it's something secretive. He said it was important. Important? Pressed. Do you know where we can find them? I don't think you want to get involved, he warned, his voice shaky. I heard things, bad things. As we walked away, Sarah looked at me, her expression filled with concern. What do you think this group is? Do you think they have something to do with his disappearance? I don't know, but we need to find out more, I said firmly. Let's talk to some of his other friends. Our search led us to a quieter corner of the school, where we found another friend of Jake's, a girl named Mia. She was sitting alone, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. Mia, have you seen Jake? Sarah asked gently. Mia looked up, and I could see the fear in her eyes. I don't want to talk about it. Please, I urged. We're really worried about him. After a moment, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. I heard he was going to a party last night. A strange party. People were saying it was different, like they were part of something. A cult, Sarah whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I don't know, Mia said, shaking her head, but he seemed really into it. It was like he was a different person. We left Mia, the weight of her words heavy on our hearts. As we walked back home, I could feel Sarah's tension rising. It was as if the air around us was thick with foreboding. Do you think he's in danger? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, I admitted, feeling my own heart race. But we can't just ignore this. We need to dig deeper. That's when we bumped into Ethan, who had been waiting near the entrance of the school. His face lit up when he saw Sarah, but his smile faltered when he noticed the worry etched on both our faces. Hey, what's going on? He asked, stepping closer. Jake is missing, Sarah replied, her voice shaky. We're trying to find him. Ethan's expression shifted, and I could see concern replacing his earlier cheerfulness. I'm sorry to hear that. I always thought he was a bit off lately. What can I do to help? Anything you can, I said, grateful that he was willing to join us. We think he might be involved with some kind of secret group. We need to find out where he is. Let's start by looking for more information about this group, Ethan suggested, determination sparking in his eyes. I can help with that. As we walked home, Ethan filled us in on some rumors he had heard around school. There's been talk about a gathering in the woods, he said, his voice low. Some students have been saying it's a ritual or something. A ritual? Sarah repeated, her eyes widening. What kind of ritual? I don't know, but it's supposed to be intense. Some kids have been going missing, and people think it might be connected. My heart sank at his words. The pieces were slowly coming together, but they formed a picture that terrified me. We needed answers, and fast. Later that day, while rummaging through the attic for any clues, Sarah and Ethan stumbled upon an old, dusty journal belonging to our grandfather. It was hidden beneath a pile of forgotten boxes, its leather cover cracked and worn. Look at this, Sarah said, opening the journal. Her fingers traced the faded ink. It talks about our family history. There are mentions of a society, something about secrets. Ethan leaned in, his brow furrowing as he read the words. This is weird, talks about rituals and gatherings. Our family could have been involved in something dark. What if Jake got mixed up in this? I said, my stomach churning. What if he's trying to connect with this society? As we continued to read, the tension grew thicker. There were references to sacrifices and a lineage that held secrets. Do you think this could be connected to Jake's disappearance? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. It has to be, I replied, worry creeping into my tone. If he's involved with this group, he could be in serious danger. Ethan's face darkened. We need to figure out who else is involved. If Jake has gotten himself into something like this, we need to know what we're dealing with. After hours of searching, we found a list of names in the back of the journal, names of people who had been part of the society. My heart raced as I recognized a few of them. They were families that had been in our town for generations. Old families with secrets. This is getting worse, Sarah said, her voice shaky. We should be careful. If they're still active, they could be watching us. We decided to visit the local library, hoping to find more information about the society. As we combed through old newspapers, we found articles about disappearances linked to strange gatherings. The articles were chilling, detailing accounts of people who had vanished without a trace. Their last known locations often near the woods where we had searched for Jake. This is terrifying, I whispered, staring at the news clippings. How could we have not known about this? Sarah's face was pale as she flipped through the pages. We need to get out of here. Something is off, and I can feel it. Just as we stepped outside, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a figure in a dark hood, lurking in the distance. They seemed to be watching us, their body tense and coiled like a predator waiting to strike. Do you see that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We need to go. Now. We hurried away from the library, the figure still in our peripheral vision. My heart raced as the sense of being followed consumed me. We had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than we had anticipated, and Jake was at the center of it all. That night, we gathered at Sarah's house, the weight of our discoveries pressing down on us. With Ethan's help, we managed to access some records on local forums, hoping to find any more leads on the society. We pored over the information late into the night, our exhaustion overshadowed by the nagging fear that time was running out for Jake. Then, amidst the chaos of our search, we found something shocking. Jake's name mentioned in connection with illegal activities. Wait, what? I breathed, staring at the screen in disbelief. This can't be right. It has to be, Ethan said, his eyes scanning the screen quickly. He made some sort of deal. This could be why he's in danger. No, it doesn't make sense, Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. Jake would never do something like that. He's not a criminal. But what if he felt he had no choice? I replied, my heart pounding. What if he's been coerced into this? As we continued to dig deeper, Sarah's expression shifted from disbelief to sheer terror. What if all this time we didn't know who Jake really was? What if he's been hiding something from us? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Doubt crept in, and I could see it reflected in Sarah's eyes. The truth was unraveling, and with it, the fabric of our friendship was fraying. The dim light of the bar flickered above us, casting shadows across the sticky wooden tables. Sarah and I squeezed into a booth at the back, our hearts racing from the adrenaline of our latest discovery. The air was thick with the smell of spilled beer and desperation, a fitting atmosphere for what we were about to do. Ethan sat across from us, his brow furrowed with concern. Are you sure about this? He asked, glancing nervously at the entrance. I mean, confronting a member of that society could end badly for us. We have to know the truth, Sarah replied, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of fear. If Jake is in danger, we can't just sit back and do nothing. I nodded in agreement, though doubt gnawed at my insides. The information we had uncovered about the secret society was disturbing, and every revelation felt like a layer of the truth being peeled back, exposing something darker beneath. We can't let our fear control us. We owe it to Jake to find out what's really going on. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, But if things get out of hand, we need to be ready to leave. Fast. Just then, a figure entered the bar, and I felt my pulse quicken. He was tall, with a rugged face and piercing eyes that scanned the room before landing on our booth. It was Marcus, one of the members we had heard about, with connections to Jake's recent activities. He sauntered over, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Well, if it isn't the brave little heroes," he said, sliding into the booth without invitation. His presence felt suffocating, and I could almost hear the tension crackling in the air. "What brings you two lovely ladies and their friend to this side of town?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "We have some questions for you, Marcus." "Questions? How charming," he said, leaning back with a feigned nonchalance. "But I'm afraid I don't have time for games." "This isn't a game," I interjected, trying to suppress my anger. "Jake is missing, and we know he's been involved with your group. What do you know about him?" Marcus chuckled, a low, mocking sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, you poor things. You really think you can just waltz in here and demand answers? Jake made his choices. He knew what he was getting into." "Choices?" Sarah echoed, her voice rising. "You think this is a choice? He's in trouble, and you know it." His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something. Was it guilt? Before he masked it with a sneer. Trouble? Or is it just the natural consequence of his decisions? "You have to understand, the society offers power, but it comes at a price." "Power?" I scoffed. "What kind of power comes from threatening and manipulating people? You're nothing but a bunch of cowards hiding behind your secrets." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, kid. You don't want to make enemies you can't afford. The society doesn't take kindly to nosy little brats poking their noses where they don't belong." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you saying? Are you threatening us?" "Not a threat, just a friendly warning," he replied, his voice dangerously calm. "You should know that digging deeper can lead to consequences you can't even begin to imagine." Sarah's hands balled into fists, and I could see her fighting the urge to lash out. "We're not afraid of you. We'll do whatever it takes to find Jake." He chuckled again, but this time it felt different, more sinister. "Bravery is admirable, but naivete can be deadly. You think you can just waltz into our world and expect to come out unscathed? It's not how it works." Ethan finally spoke up, his voice low and serious. "What do you know about Jake's involvement with the society? Did you bring him into this?" Marcus's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Oh, he was drawn to us like a moth to a flame. The thrill, the power, he couldn't resist. But once you're in, there's no easy way out. Jake found that out the hard way." "What do you mean by that?" I pressed, desperate for any clue that might lead us to him. "There's a cost for everything. Jake made a deal, and he's been living with the consequences. You should ask yourselves if you really want to know what he's gotten himself into," Marcus said, leaning back as if he had just dropped a bombshell. "You're not answering our questions," Sarah exclaimed, exasperated. "You're just playing games." "Games? This isn't a game, sweetheart. This is life or death," he sneered, his expression turning serious. "You think you can save him? He's already made his choice. The society protects its own, and if he's in too deep, there's nothing you can do." With that, he stood up, preparing to leave, but I couldn't let him go without trying one last time. "Wait, tell us how to find him. If you know anything, you have to help us." He paused, looking back at us with an inscrutable expression. "You really don't get it, do you? The moment you step into our world, you become a target too. You think I'm gonna risk my neck for a couple of kids? Not a chance." He turned to leave, but then added, "Just remember, not everyone in the society is as forgiving as I am. Watch your backs." As he walked away, the weight of his words settled heavily on my chest. I felt a mix of anger and fear, the kind that made my stomach churn. "What are we going to do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We keep looking," Sarah said, her determination flickering like a candle in the dark. "We can't give up on Jake. He needs us." Ethan nodded, even though he looked pale and shaken. "But how?" We don't have any leads, and Marcus isn't going to help us. We need to dig deeper into the society, I suggested. Maybe there's something we missed. We can't let fear stop us. Right? Sarah said, her eyes brightening with renewed resolve. We'll find a way. We have to. As we left the bar, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The night was dark, and the air felt heavy with secrets. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Marcus lurking in the shadows. But there was only the echo of our footsteps on the pavement. Do you think he's telling the truth? Ethan asked, breaking the silence as we walked. I don't know, I replied, my mind racing. But if he is, we have to be careful. We're in way over our heads. Sarah looked between us, determination etched on her face. We'll figure it out. Together. As we made our way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The message on the tree echoed in my mind. He's not who you think he is. I had no idea what that meant for Jake or for us, but one thing was clear. We were in the middle of something much bigger than we had ever anticipated, and the darkness was closing in. The night was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the distant rustle of leaves, our lanterns casting jagged shadows that danced around us as we made our way through the overgrown path leading to the old warehouse. Sarah walked in front, her silhouette outlined against the pale moonlight, a determined look on her face. We were both shaken by the recent revelations about Jake, but the urgency to find him drove us forward. Do you think he's really here? Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know, I replied, clutching the lantern tightly. But we have to check. We can't just leave him out here. Not after everything we've discovered. She nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. We had pieced together fragments of information from the diary and the whispers of Jake's friends. The society he had become entangled with was more than just a group of rebellious teens. It was something darker, something that threatened to swallow him whole. As we approached the warehouse, the structure loomed before us, its windows boarded up and its exterior covered in vines, giving it a haunting appearance. The air felt charged, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. I glanced at Sarah, who took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Ready? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Yeah, she said, her voice steadfast. Let's do this. Pushing the creaky door open, we stepped inside, the sound echoing through the vast emptiness. Dust motes floated in the beam of our lantern as we surveyed the dimly lit space. It was surprisingly large, with high ceilings and a faint smell of mildew. Old crates and rusted machinery lay scattered about, remnants of its past life. Jake, I called out, my voice slightly shaky. Silence was our only reply. Where are you? Sarah added, her voice wavering as she stepped deeper into the shadows. As we moved further in, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, their meanings lost to time but unmistakably sinister in their design. My skin prickled with unease, and I could sense Sarah's tension mounting. Do you see that? She said, pointing to a collection of objects gathered in the center of the room. I squinted, and as the light from our lantern fell upon it, my stomach dropped. There, in the center, was an altar of sorts, adorned with more of those eerie symbols and what looked like remnants of candles, long burnt out. Felt wrong, like we had stumbled into a place where dark secrets were kept. Why would he be here? I whispered, my heart racing. I don't know, Sarah replied, her brow furrowed in concern. But it feels like this is where we need to be. Just then, a loud creak echoed through the warehouse, causing us both to jump. The sound was followed by a door slamming open, and we froze, our lanterns casting frantic beams of light around the room. Jake! Sarah shouted, her voice filled with desperation. Over here! I called, my heart leaping at the possibility that we might finally find him. As we rushed toward the sound, we turned a corner and came face to face with a figure standing in the shadows. It was him, Jake, but he looked different, almost hollow. His eyes, once full of life, were now void of emotion, as if he had become a shell of the person we once knew. Jake! Sarah exclaimed, tears springing to her eyes. We've been looking for you. He stepped forward, but something in his demeanor held us back. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. "We were worried about you. You sent a message saying you were in trouble." "I'm not in trouble," Jake replied, his gaze hardening. I'm where I need to be." "Where you need to be?" Sarah echoed, disbelief flooding her voice. "Jake, you're scaring me. This isn't you." He shook his head, stepping further into the dim light of our lantern. "You don't understand. I'm part of something now. Something bigger." "What are you talking about?" I pressed, feeling a rising panic. "You're talking about that society, aren't you? They're dangerous." "They're not dangerous," he said, his tone confusingly calm. "They're powerful, and they can protect me. They can protect us." "Protect us," Sarah repeated, her voice trembling. "Jake, this isn't the answer. We can help you. Just come back with us." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound that echoed in the empty space. "You don't get it. Can't go back. Not now. Not after everything I've done." "What have you done?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. "Jake, please. We just want to help you." But he was staring past us now, his expression distant and unfocused. "It's too late for that. You should have stayed away." Before I could respond, I heard a rustling noise from the shadows behind him. A chill raced down my spine as I realized we were not alone. Figures started emerging from the darkness, cloaked in long robes adorned with those same sinister symbols we had seen earlier. My heart raced as I recognized the faces of some of the people we had seen in the newspaper clippings, members of that society. "Jake?" "No," Sarah whimpered, grabbing my arm. The figures moved closer, surrounding us, their intentions unreadable. "Jake, you need to get away from them," I urged, my voice rising in desperation. "They're using you." But Jake didn't respond. Instead, he looked at the cloaked figures with an unsettling calmness, as if they were his true family now. "Jake, please," I implored, stepping forward. "This isn't you. We know the truth about this place, about the society. You're not a part of this darkness." He turned his gaze back to us, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the old Jake, the friend I had grown up with, the boy who would do anything to protect us. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "You don't understand," he said softly. "I'm not the same anymore. I've seen things, done things. I can't just walk away." "Then we'll help you fight it," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "We can figure this out together." But Jake shook his head, his eyes hardening once more. "You don't get it. There's no fighting this. I've made a choice." "Jake!" I shouted, frustration boiling over. "What about everything we've been through? What about Sarah? You can't just throw all that away." "Enough!" one of the cloaked figures barked, stepping forward. "He has chosen his path. Leave before you regret it." "Jake, please," Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't have to do this. You can come back with us. We can make it right." But Jake remained silent, his eyes glazed over, a distant look settling upon his face once again. It was as if a wall had been built between us, and no matter how hard we tried to break through, he was already lost to us. As the cloaked figures closed in tighter, I could feel the weight of despair settling over us like a thick fog. We were losing him, and there was nothing we could do to save him. "Jake!" I shouted one last time, desperation clawing at my throat. "Don't do this." But he turned away, looking toward the shadows where the society members stood, their presence suffocating. "Jake!" Sarah cried, her voice breaking as she reached out a hand. But he didn't turn back. In that moment, it became clear. We had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The boy we had once known was gone, replaced by someone consumed by shadows and secrets. As the figures surrounded him, I felt a crushing weight in my chest. He was slipping away, and all we could do was watch. "Let's go," I whispered to Sarah, my voice barely audible. The reality of what was happening settled heavily in the air, and the only thing left for us was to retreat, to escape the darkness that had claimed our friend. We turned and fled, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the cold, abandoned walls. I could still hear Sarah's sobs behind me, and I felt the same grief pooling in my own heart. It was over. The boy we had come to save was lost, and all we could do was run as fast as we could from the shadows, knowing that we might never see him again. The air inside the old warehouse was thick with the scent of damp wood and rusted metal. Shadows flickered across the walls, cast by the weak light from our flashlights. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances as we crept further into the desolate space, our hearts racing with each step. The eerie stillness was unnerving, but we pressed on, driven by the desperate hope of finding Jake. "Jake!" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. The sound felt swallowed by the darkness. "Where are you?" There was no response, just the unsettling silence that seemed to close in around us. My mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened to him. The last message we received still burned in my memory. "I'm in trouble." Those words haunted me. "Do you think he could really be here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she shined her flashlight on the crumbling walls. "I don't know," I replied, trying to mask my fear with a facade of confidence. "But we have to keep looking." We moved deeper into the warehouse, our footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. Symbols painted on the walls, strange and sinister. I stepped closer, squinting to make them out. But before I could say anything, a door creaked open at the far end of the room. My heart raced as a figure stepped into the dim light. It was Jake, but he looked different. There was something unsettling in his eyes, a vacant stare that sent chills down my spine. "Jake!" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is that really you?" He stepped forward, and I could see the tension in his posture. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and flat, devoid of the warmth I remembered. "Why? What's going on?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with shock. "We were worried about you. You said you were in trouble." Jake shook his head, running a hand through his hair as if trying to shake off a nightmare. "I am in trouble, but you don't understand. I can't leave." "What do you mean you can't leave?" I pressed, desperation clawing at me. "You're not safe here. We can help you." He laughed bitterly, but it lacked any humor. "Help me? You don't know what you're dealing with. This isn't just some game, this is serious. I made a choice, and now I have to live with it." "Jake, please," Sarah pleaded, stepping closer to him. "We love you. You can't just throw your life away for something you don't even believe in." He flinched at her words, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I knew. "You don't get it. It's not just about me anymore. There are things at play here that you can't comprehend." "Then make us understand," I shouted, frustration boiling over. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Jake looked around as if the shadows themselves were listening. "They're not just people. They're powerful. They've got connections, and they've made it clear that I can't just walk away. If I try, they'll come after me. After you. After everyone I care about." "Jake, we can face them together," Sarah insisted, reaching out to him. "We'll find a way to beat them. You don't have to do this alone." He recoiled slightly, almost as if her touch burned him. "No, Sarah, you don't understand. You're better off without me. I can't drag you into this." "Don't say that," I shouted, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You're our friend. We're not leaving you behind." The tension in the air was palpable, and Jake's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're asking. You think you can just walk in here and save the day? It doesn't work like that." "Then tell us what it does take," I urged, my voice breaking. "What do you need?" "I can't tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've done things I can't take back." "Then let us help you make it right," Sarah said, her eyes pleading with him. "We'll figure it out together." Jake's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but then he shook his head, as if shaking off the doubt. "There's no way out for me. They'll kill me if I try to leave. The only way to protect you both is to stay." "Stay here," I exclaimed, incredulous. "You can't be serious. It's the only way," he insisted, his voice steadying. "You don't get it. I've made a deal and now I have to honor it. I'm trapped." "Trapped? By who? Who are they?" Sarah pressed, desperation creeping into her voice. "Members of that secret society," he explained, the words spilling from him like a confession. "They've got their claws deep in this town, and I've become a pawn in their game. I didn't choose this, but now I'm in too deep. Jake, please," I begged, my heart racing. "You can fight this. We can fight this together." He looked at us, and for a moment I thought he might break. "I wish it were that simple, but it's not just me anymore. It's about keeping you safe. I can't let them hurt you because of me." "Then let us help you fight," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with emotion. "You don't have to do this alone. We can find a way out." Jake stepped back, his expression hardening again. "No, you don't understand. The more you know, the more danger you put yourselves in. I can't let that happen. You have to go." "Jake, please don't do this," I cried, my voice cracking. "We're not leaving you here. I said go," he shouted, the desperation in his voice rising. "If you care about me at all, you'll turn around and walk out of here. This is my fight, not yours." "Your fight," I echoed, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You think we'll just leave you to fight it alone? You don't get to make that decision for us." "It's not a decision," he insisted, his voice rising with frustration. "It's a fact. You can't save me. I've already made my choice, and now I have to live with it." As his words hung in the air, I felt the weight of his despair pressing down on me. I wanted to scream, to shake him and make him see reason. But deep down, I knew he was lost in a world I couldn't reach. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as a low murmur of voices echoed outside the warehouse. My heart sank as I realized the group was gathering, their presence a dark cloud looming over us. "Jake, please," Sarah cried, tears brimming in her eyes. "Don't do this. I don't have a choice," he said, his voice breaking as he turned away from us. "You need to leave. Now." "Jake, no," I shouted, reaching out to him, but he stepped back, his eyes cold and distant. "Go," he yelled, and the command sent shivers down my spine. "They're coming. You have to get out while you still can." Panic surged through me as I glanced at Sarah, her face a mixture of shock and heartbreak. "We can't just leave him," I protested, my voice trembling. "Don't you see?" Jake said, his voice softening for a moment. "This is the only way to keep you safe. You have to trust me. Just go." The urgency in his tone struck a chord within me, and for a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was a battle he had to fight alone. But the thought of leaving him behind felt like a knife to my heart. Just then, the door creaked open further, and the figures of the group spilled into the warehouse, dark silhouettes against the dim light. My heart raced as I felt the encroaching threat, and I turned to Sarah, desperation etched on our faces. "Jake, please," I shouted one last time, my voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "Don't do this." But as I watched him step back into the shadows, the flicker of the light revealing the resolve in his eyes, I knew I was losing him. The weight of the moment settled heavily around us, and I felt the world slipping away as the figures closed in. The air inside the abandoned warehouse was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by the flickering light of our flashlight, revealing symbols that made my skin crawl. I turned to Sarah, her face pale with worry, and saw the fear mirrored in her eyes. We had come so far, and now, standing in this eerie place, the reality of our situation truly sank in. "Jake," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. "Are you here?" The only response was the sound of dripping water, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I glanced at Sarah, who was biting her lip, her hands trembling slightly. "What if he's not here?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "He has to be," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "He wouldn't just disappear without a trace. We have to keep looking." We stepped further into the darkness, our flashlights illuminating the crumbling remnants of what was once an active space. The atmosphere felt charged, as if we were intruding on something sacred or dangerous. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each thump a reminder of the urgency that had driven us here. Then, just as I was about to suggest we turn back, a creaking sound echoed from deeper within the warehouse. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. It sounded like someone's here. I felt a rush of adrenaline. "Jake!" I shouted again, more forcefully this time. "If you're here, you need to let us know." And then, suddenly, a door swung open at the far end of the room, and a figure stepped into the light. My heart dropped as I recognized him immediately. It was Jake, but he looked different. His clothes were disheveled, his skin pale, and his eyes, oh God, his eyes, were void of the warmth I remembered. They were cold, almost lifeless. "Jake!" Sarah cried, rushing towards him. I followed closely behind, a mix of relief and dread swirling in my stomach. "We were so worried about you." He looked at us, but there was a distance in his gaze that made my stomach twist. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and hollow. "It's not safe." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to catch his gaze fully. "We've been looking for you. We thought you were in trouble." "I am in trouble," he replied, his tone sharp. "But it's too late for me. You don't understand what I've gotten into." "Then help us understand," Sarah implored, her voice cracking with emotion. "We can get you out of here. You don't have to stay with them." Jake shook his head slowly, a pained expression crossing his face. "I can't leave. They won't let me. I've made a deal and I have to pay the price." "What kind of deal?" I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. "Jake, please, we can help you. Just tell us what we need to do." He stepped back, almost as if recoiling from our concern. "You don't know what you're asking. This isn't something you can just walk away from. It's a part of me now." "But you're still you," Sarah pleaded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We know you, Jake, the real you, the one who would never just give up." "I'm not the same anymore," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of his confession. "I've done things, terrible things, and now I'm trapped in this life." Before I could respond, the air shifted. I sensed movement behind Jake, and a group of figures began to emerge from the shadows, their faces obscured by hoods. My heart raced as I realized we were no longer alone. "Jake, get away from them!" I shouted, instinctively stepping forward to shield Sarah. The figures moved closer, their intentions unclear but menacing. "Stay back," Jake warned, his voice suddenly firm. "You don't want to get involved in this. Please, just leave while you can." "No!" Sarah shouted, her voice rising with panic. "We're not leaving you here. We came for you, and we're not going to abandon you now." The hooded figures exchanged glances, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. They were closing in, and I knew we had to act fast. "Jake, we can fight them," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "We won't let them take you." He looked conflicted, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the Jake I remembered, the brave, loyal friend who would stand by us no matter what. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a resigned acceptance. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. "If I resist, they'll hurt you. I can't let that happen." "Jake, please," I begged, stepping closer. "Think about everything we've been through. You're stronger than this. You don't have to give in." At that moment, the leader of the hooded figures stepped forward, a low, threatening chuckle escaping from beneath their hood. "It's too late for him, and it's too late for you too as well. You should have known better than to come here." I felt a surge of anger and fear. "You stay away from him," I shouted, positioning myself protectively in front of Jake. "We're not afraid of you," but deep down, I could feel the fear gnawing at me. I glanced at Sarah, who looked equally terrified, her eyes darting between me and Jake. The hooded figure moved closer, raising a hand as if to silence us. "Enough," they said, their voice dripping with authority. "Jake made a choice. He's ours now, and you will not interfere." "Jake, don't do this," Sarah cried out, her voice filled with desperation. "You don't have to go with them. We can find a way to save you." But Jake's expression hardened, and I saw the conflict raging within him. "I can't protect you if I leave," he said, his eyes darting to the figures behind him. "This is the only way." "No," I shouted, feeling the weight of despair settle over me. "We can fight this together." "Enough," the leader yelled, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The other figures shifted, ready to advance. "Jake," I cried, my voice breaking. "Please, you're not alone." With a sudden movement, Jake stepped back, distancing himself from us. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have to do this." "Do what?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "What are you talking about?" He looked down, and for a moment, I thought I saw tears glistening in his eyes. "I thought I could find a way out, but I was wrong. The only way to protect you is to embrace this life, to join them." "Jake, no!" Sarah screamed, her voice filled with anguish. "You're making a mistake." But it was too late. The hooded figures moved closer, their intentions clear. "It's time to make your choice, Jake," the leader said, a menacing grin spreading across their face. "Jake, don't!" I shouted, stepping forward, but the figures were too quick. They encircled him, blocking our view. I felt a surge of panic and helplessness. And then, just as I thought I might lose him forever, Jake turned to face us, his expression resolute. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "I can't go with you. I have to stay." "Jake!" Sarah cried, reaching out for him, but the figures held her back, their grip like iron. "I love you both," he said, his voice breaking, "but I can't let you get hurt because of me. This is the only way." "No!" I yelled, my heart shattering. "You don't have to do this. We can figure it out together." But Jake shook his head, and in that moment, I knew. He had made his choice, and there was nothing we could do to change it. The figures closed in around him, and I was left standing there, helpless as I watched my friend turn his back on us. "Jake!" I screamed, but it was too late. They were gone, taking him with them into the shadows, leaving only silence in their wake. Sarah collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, and I sank down beside her, my heart heavy with despair. We had come so far, fought so hard, and yet, in the end, we had lost him. I wrapped my arms around her, both of us trembling with the weight of what had just happened. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah said, her voice choked with tears. "He's gone. He chose them over us." I didn't know what to say. The reality of our situation settled heavily around us, suffocating and dark. We had lost Jake, and with him, a part of ourselves. The shadows of the warehouse loomed over us, a reminder of the choices that had led us to this moment. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we would never truly escape the darkness that had taken him away. The night air was thick with tension as Sarah and I stood in the shadows of the old warehouse, our hearts pounding in our chests. The faint sounds of chanting echoed around us, mixing with the rustling leaves outside like a sinister lullaby. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Jake, our Jake, had transformed into something unrecognizable, and now he was standing before us, his eyes hollow and devoid of emotion. "Jake, please." Sarah's voice trembled as she stepped forward, desperation etched on her face. "You don't have to do this. We can leave together right now." He looked at her, but there was something cold in his gaze, a distance that felt insurmountable. "I can't, Sarah. You don't understand. I've made choices that come with consequences." "Consequences? Jake, you're talking about a life you've chosen over us, over your family," I shouted, frustration spilling out. "You're not alone in this. We can help you." His lips twisted into a grim smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Help? You think you can save me? I'm beyond saving. This is who I am now. My heart sank at his words, the weight of their meaning crashing down on me like a tidal wave. This wasn't the Jake I had known since childhood. The boy who used to climb trees with us, who shared secrets under the stars. This was a stranger, a lost soul wrapped in darkness. Don't say that, Sarah cried, tears brimming in her eyes. You're still Jake, the Jake we love. You can fight this. You can come back. He shook his head slowly, almost sadly. You don't know what I've done, the things I've seen. I can't go back to being that person. They won't let me. Before I could respond, the air shifted, and the atmosphere grew oppressive as shadows congregated around us. Figures emerged, cloaked in darkness, their intentions palpable in the air. The chanting grew louder, an ominous rhythm that echoed the beating of my heart. Jake! I shouted, reaching out to him, but it felt like grasping at smoke. You have to fight. Don't let them take you. But he remained motionless, his expression almost serene in the face of our panic. It's too late, he whispered, almost as if he were trying to convince himself. I belong to them now. The figures encircled us, their faces obscured by hoods. I recognized one of them, a man who had been lurking in the periphery of our investigation. He stepped forward, his voice smooth yet chilling. It's time for your decision, Jake. You've been given a chance to prove your loyalty. No, I shouted, stepping in front of Sarah, instinctively protecting her. You can't let them do this to you. We can find another way. Stand down, the man commanded, raising his hand as if to silence us. You're only complicating matters. Complicating matters? I scoffed, my anger bubbling over. This is madness. You're taking him against his will, and you know it. Jake's gaze flickered between the figures and us, uncertainty creeping into his eyes for the first time. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Then listen to us, Sarah urged, her voice cracking. You have to remember who you are. Fight back, Jake. Please. Jake, the man said, his tone shifting to one of persuasion. This is your chance to embrace your true self. You can't hide behind them forever. Join us, and you will have power, respect, and freedom. Freedom, I echoed, incredulous. Is that what you call being a pawn in their twisted game? Jake's expression shifted, a flicker of the boy I once knew breaking through the icy facade. I thought I could find something here, something worth fighting for, he said, his voice trembling. But this isn't it, I yelled, desperation clawing at my throat. You're losing yourself, Jake. You're not just abandoning us. You're abandoning everything you ever believed in. The tension in the air thickened, the figures closing in around us. Jake took a step back, his body tense, as if he were battling an internal war. What if I can't go back? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Then we'll help you find a way, Sarah pleaded. You don't have to do this. We can figure it out together. But the man stepped closer, his voice dripping with disdain. Do you really think they would let you leave? You're in too deep, Jake. You know what you have to do. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched the struggle play out in Jake's expression. He was torn, caught between the remnants of the boy who had once been our friend and the looming shadow of the society that had ensnared him. Jake, I said softly, trying to reach him. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. We can escape. We'll find a way. I can't, he finally said, his voice breaking. I made a deal, and now I have to pay the price. No, I shouted, stepping forward. Don't you see? This isn't the way. You're worth more than this. But as I spoke, I felt the encroaching presence of the figures tightening around us, their intentions dark and foreboding. Jake's gaze fell, and I could see the acceptance washing over him, mixed with regret. Jake, please. Sarah's voice broke again, her tears flowing freely now. You're still our Jake. Don't let them take you. He looked at her, and for a brief moment, I saw the flicker of hope in his eyes. I want to fight, he whispered, but the resolve began to falter as the shadows closed in. The leader of the cloaked figures stepped forward, a sinister smile on his face. It's time, Jake. Your decision will determine your fate. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Jake stood frozen, his identity hanging in the balance. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us, the air thick with despair. I can't do this, he finally said, his voice trembling. I can't betray you. But before I could respond, the figures surged forward, forcing him into their fold. You've made your choice, the leader said with a smirk. Embrace your destiny, Jake. No, I screamed, lunging toward him, but it was too late. The darkness enveloped him, pulling him away from us. Jake, Sarah cried, her voice filled with anguish as she reached out, but he was already slipping further from our grasp. In that moment, everything felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The chanting grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, and I felt a sense of helplessness wash over me. As they dragged him away, Jake turned back to us one last time, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resignation. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the noise, and then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving us standing in the cold, empty darkness of the warehouse. Sarah collapsed to the ground, her sobs echoing in the cavernous space. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her trembling form, but I felt just as lost. We should have done something more, I whispered, guilt flooding my heart. Why didn't we save him? She cried, her voice raw with pain. Why didn't he let us help him? I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold her and share in the weight of our loss. The message carved into the tree echoed in my mind. He is not who you think he is. We had lost Jake to something we couldn't comprehend, something that had changed him irrevocably. And in that moment, I realized the truth behind those words. In the end, it wasn't just Jake who had changed. It was us. As we stumbled out of the warehouse, the weight of our failure hung heavy between us. We had entered this journey with hope, but now we were left with nothing but questions and the haunting realization that we might never know the full truth of what had happened. The darkness felt suffocating, and as we walked away from the scene, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had all lost something precious that night. Jake had made his choice, but in doing so, he had taken a piece of us with him, leaving us in a world that felt infinitely darker and colder without him. And as we stepped into the night, the stars above twinkled mockingly, unaware of the turmoil we had just endured. We had lost a friend, a brother, and a part of ourselves. The echoes of his last words lingered in the air, and I knew that our lives would never be the same again.